Hello and welcome everyone back to another episode of Backlog Reviews. Today's topic is Fights in Tight Spaces, a roguelike deck building fighting game, sort of like Slay the Spire. As always, we'll be going over the same three topics in the story, gameplay, performance on the Steam Deck, and then giving the game a rating out of 10 at the end. So, starting off with the story, you are Agent 11, a top agent for the government working to take down crime organizations and ultimately stop a rogue agent from trying to start another world conflict through a false flag operation. Now, the story is pretty light beyond that, as the only real tidbits you get are small conversations you have with your boss about each gang that you'll be taking on. The missions are broken up into chapters where you take down individual gangs, with them being made up of bikers, prisoners, ninjas, and new age mobsters. The final chapter having you go against the rogue agent themselves along with their henchmen. Story-wise, that's really just it. There is an alternate plot of sorts with the Weapons of Choice DLC, but it really doesn't change much aside from you having to deal with two assassins at the start of every chapter, but they don't exactly span upon the plot for real. But with games like these, the story really only exists to give the game a reason for having its events play out. Now, moving on to gameplay now, over the course of the game, as you progress, enemies will become harder to kill, do more damage, and overall be more adept at taking you down, not only being able to counter your attacks, but also having armor that can regenerate every turn, moving when you move, and so on. So it's a lot of in-depth system in this game, so I'll try to go over them the best that I can in order. So starting off with the roguelike elements in this game, you have a number of decks you can play with, and of course as you play you'll continue to unlock more decks, which are directly tied to what kind of playstyle you'll have to have during each run. The names of the decks of course clearly state their use, that being the Counter Striker, the Aggressive, Slasher, Grappler, Trickster, and Balance, and the Weapons of Choice DLC also adds in the Gunslinger, which was my personal favorite, but I'll explain more why later. But of course, if you don't like any of the decks that are offered to you, you can also just make your own deck based on the cards that you've unlocked up to that point, which I think is really neat, though personally I didn't really feel the need to do so, but once you picked your deck, you then choose which game to take on first, and then you are shown a map of randomized missions and encounters that have alternate paths to choose from until you reach the end of the mission and get to the boss fight. So every fight you have the opportunity to pick up a new card after you completing it from 3 randomized reward cards to add to your deck, or you can skip it entirely. There are also random events that you can choose from to take part in. Instead of doing fights, they can lead you to get extra money, health, cards, or enhancements, with essentially just act as passive abilities that range from earning more money, higher health, auto armor, and so on. Enhancements are also earned at the end of every boss fight, of course, all this being randomized every run, of course. As for money, you can also use it to buy new cards that you add to your deck from shops, aka the gym, or you can upgrade them as well for a hefty fee, depending on what it is. Or you can go to the Restore Health, increase your max health, or remove injuries. Speaking of injuries, that leads us into the next segment about combat. So the way it works is that Agent 11 has a set amount of quote-unquote momentum at the start of every turn that basically acts like stamina. You draw a random set of 5 cards, each with their own momentum required to use them. The game generally gives you an even set amount of cards with 1 attack, 1 movement, 1 defense card, and then the other 2 are random, but of course that varies upon what it's actually in your deck and what the RNG decides to give you. So the combat is grid style, and enemies are randomly placed on the map, and then you use your cards to attack, defend, or move as you see fit. On lower difficulty settings, you do have what the game calls rollbacks, basically meaning you get to undo all the cards you just played for that turn. You only have 3 of these per fight though, but once you do hit end turn, whatever you did is locked in, and then your enemies will act. Now, the game being turn-based combat on a grid, the enemies do have a chance of hurting one another, so you're going to want to use this to your advantage, as everything they do is going to be predetermined. Simply hovering the cursor over them will explain what they will do, how much damage their attacks will do, how much health they have, if they have any extra quirks and armor to look out for, such as moving when you move, having regenerating armor, auto-turning to face you in combat, if they will auto-attack if someone's in front of them, and so on. And as you progress in the game, what abilities they have are going to vary, and they will continue to stack on top of one another, so how you face each gang will have to change in accordance to what they're capable of doing, which is why the Gunslinger deck is my favorite, as it allows the long-range combat to happen most frequently, neutralizing most of the annoying abilities that the enemies have, such as countering every incoming attack, because if you don't have a dodge or a counter/block card to use, you're going to take damage every single time you hit them, and that's going to lead to a quick death. Speaking of quick death, there's also similar environmental factors that can help you or hurt you, as you and your enemies will both be vulnerable to them, such as ledges and breakable windows, etc., where you and the enemies can be pushed off of the grid that will instant kill you and them. The game highlights these out of bounds areas in red before the start of the match, so be on the watch for them as you want to try to use them where you can, as they can be extremely helpful. So win or lose, at the end of every run, based on how you did, you can earn XP that once you level up, you'll unlock new cards that can be found/bought during the next run. This also allows new decks to be unlocked, but I wasn't a fan of that, as I felt like it was a bit restricting, having to choose between only a certain amount of decks at the start, but I understand why they did this. Of course, you want to be able to unlock new things and so on. And again, I want to reiterate, everything I mentioned is randomized to an extent, from how the map is laid out, card rewards, enemy placements, and so on. Also, I forgot to mention, you can also pick up injuries that are both long and short term. So short term injuries basically just mean they affect you for the length of the fight in which you get them, and then you recover right afterwards. Whereas long term injuries must be fixed by going to a doctor and paying to have them removed. They can give you negative debuffs ranging from damage, reduce, stamina, block, etc. And they basically act as a card that gets shuffled into your deck, so whenever you draw, that's when the card takes its effect. That aside, all fights, including the boss fights, play out the same, with the main objective being to eliminate all the enemies on the screen, with optional side objectives that deliver extra rewards at the end, such as winning the fight in a certain amount of turns, or collecting an item on the grid, or protecting an NPC the whole fight. The rewards being money, upgrades, and so on, of course. Now, before we move on to performance, there is one thing I need to mention, and it's my biggest issue with the game, but it's also the thing that makes the game, but it also breaks it, and I do mean that literally. That being the RNG, of course. But like any other roguelike, that's also going to be like the issue. Like, there's always a possibility that the game's RNG just randomizes in a point that just screws you over, but I want to try to explain myself the best that I can. Because at the end of the day, roguelike is only as good as the game allows it to be. So everything I said remains true about the randomness about how the game functions, from the enemies that you face per level, the reward cards, and so on. What isn't random though, sorta, is where enemies spawn and the cards you get in the initial shuffle. So what do I mean by that? Well, once you're dropped into the grid, you see what cards you're going to draw, and then the enemies make their initial placement movements before you start your turn. None of that is random, technically. See, the game predetermines all that before you even start, but what do I mean by that? It means no matter how many times you die and restart that level, assuming you have the ability to do so because on higher difficulties you have permadeath, no matter how many times you restart a level, the starting placement of the enemies and how your deck quote-unquote shuffles to start will always be the same. While you can, of course, change up the actions that you do and possibly affect how the deck reshuffles the second go around and so on, you are always going to be given the same initial shuffle of cards. That means if you have 20 cards, the same first 5 cards you draw are going to be the same ones every single time. Then the next 5, then the next 5, and then the next 5. They are all going to be the same every single time. So it doesn't matter how many times we restart the level. And alongside that, wherever the enemies start the match, that is where they're going to start it every single time. So why is this a problem? Because the game can essentially lock you into a no-win zone. And this happened to me especially in the later stages of the game, but it will put you in a place where it is completely unwinnable. And it forces you to abandon the run because no matter what you do, how you attack, how you move, etc., you cannot escape the starting situation in which you're placed. Or you can only survive for 2 to 3 turns max before you're killed. I had this happen to me multiple times in the final levels playing the DLC. I was simply just placed in an inescapable situation due to what cards I was given, and being spawned into a corner, and I do mean like a literal corner sometimes, so I was forced to abandon the run and restart. Not because my deck was bad, not because I trapped myself, but because the game's RNG simply decided I had enough fun and now I was dead. I cannot emphasize just how much this sucked the fun out of the game and killed my desire to keep playing when it wasn't my mistakes that ended up killing me, but rather the game just deciding my run had finished, gave me cards I could do nothing with, and no ability to get different ones. I was simply put into a corner I could not escape. Sometimes literally, again, just literally put into a corner, enemies surrounding me on all sides. Like, it was really fucking stupid. Most deaths you will face will feel earned because you took too much damage and you put yourself in an unwinnable spot as time goes on, as the pointing damage becomes incredibly harder the farther you get into the game. Because of course the enemies get tougher. But being put into a jam you cannot clear through no fault of your own is just not fun, especially when the whole point of the game is RNG. But the RNG just decides at the start of the round that this is how it's going to end, that you just cannot win. This is something I just wanted to note as well. For those of you who have never played a roguelike or a deck builder kind of game like this, please don't let this discourage you from trying it. I'm just simply explaining my frustration as to how certain runs ended, especially after I already, completed the game. Like, this is me just playing extra for my own fun, right? But when the game ends like that, I do want to just make note of it because I do think it's something that should be addressed for anyone who's interested in the game. But with that out of the way, let's talk about the performance real quick. On Steam Deck, it's Steam Deck verified, which it's 100% true. The game runs betterly smooth, of course, at max settings. I never had any issues with crashes, glitches, things not registering, and so on. I don't think I ran into a single bug while playing the game. And the game can be played for hours on end, as it has very little draw on the battery, so 10 out of 10 in that department. So now that we've talked about the story, gameplay features, and the performance, where does this game land with me on the 1 to 10 scale? It's hard for me to put into words why a slower paced game like this has the ability to end in such a disappointing fashion. It's also incredibly fun. It's kind of like trying to explain to people why Balatro is a fun game. You just have to play it to understand it. And just like with Balatro, this game is low-key a Game of the Year contender for me. I'm going to give it a 9 out of 10, easy, no doubt about it. Honestly, I would have given it a 10 out of 10 had it not been for the busted runs that I mentioned, but that might just be me being petty for real. I'm not going to lie. Also, one last thing before we go here, I do want to mention the game has a new DLC coming out for it, so it should have already dropped prior to me recording this video. So I highly encourage all of you guys to go check it out. They're remixing the story a little bit, adding new decks, new enemies, and so on, and it looks really good. I'm planning to get it as soon as I can so I can hop back into the game because it looks really good DLC. That's going to do it for me today, guys. I hope you've all enjoyed and eager to hear your thoughts down in the comment section down below. Tell me what you thought about the game. Are you interested in playing it now, or did I scare you off? If you played it before, let me know what your thoughts are on the RNG mechanics like I mentioned, or which game was the most annoying for you to face. Leave any questions or comments you have in the comment section down below, and I'll see you all next time.